Hi friends, this is Mrs. Dowd, and in this section, we're going to talk about one of the many miracles Jesus performed while he was living here on earth. It's called the miracle of the loaves and the fishes, and it's a story of how, with the help of a small boy, Jesus fed over 5,000 people. So here we go. This is a story from the Bible, filled full. There were once 5,000 tired and hungry, and probably very grumpy, people sitting on a hillside wanting their dinner. They'd come to hear Jesus that day. They came before breakfast, stayed all morning, all afternoon, and way past dinner. No one had meant to be out there that long, but that's how it was when you were listening to Jesus. It was as if time didn't exist. People could listen to Jesus for hours, and on this particular day, that's just what they did. But they hadn't brought enough food, and they couldn't just go out and buy themselves a burger and fries at the nearest restaurant because, of course, they were out in the middle of nowhere with no shops or restaurants to be found. Besides, that kind of food hadn't been invented yet. But what would they do? Jesus' friends had an idea. Well, let's just send them home for dinner. They don't need to go, Jesus said. You could give them something to eat. Did Jesus want them to travel all the way to town and buy enough food for everyone? Jesus' friends panicked. But we don't have enough money to do that. Well, what food do you have? Jesus said. Go and see. Now there was a little boy in the crowd, and he had brought a lunch that his mother had made for him that morning. He looked at his 5 loaves and 2 fish. He knew it wasn't that much, not nearly enough for 5,000, but it was all he had, and he was willing to share. I have some, he said. Jesus' friends laughed when they saw his little lunch. Why, that's not nearly enough, they said. But they were wrong. Jesus knew it didn't matter how much the little boy had. God would make it enough, more than enough. Jesus said, Bring me what you have. And so the little boy gave Jesus his lunch. Jesus winked at the little boy and whispered in his ear, Watch this. How in the world will Jesus feed everyone with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? Jesus' friends said, because they thought it was impossible. But Jesus knew. He knew the one who had made all the fish in the oceans. And Jesus knew the one who in the very beginning had made everything out of nothing at all. How hard would something like this be for someone like that? Jesus took the little boy's lunch, looked up to heaven, and thanked his Father. Then Jesus gave the little lunch back to his friends. As Jesus' friends started to hand out the food, do you know what? It was the strangest thing. No matter how much they broke off the bread, there was always more. No matter how many times they took a piece of fish, there was always more and more and more. Enough for 5,000. Everyone ate as much as they wanted, seconds, thirds, and even fourths, until they were full. And still, there were leftovers. Well, Jesus did many miracles like this, things people thought couldn't happen that weren't even natural. But somehow, he made it happen. It was the most natural thing in all the world for him. It's what God had been doing from the very beginning, of course. Taking the nothing and making it everything. Taking the emptiness and filling it up. Taking the darkness and making it light. Next, we're going to go into our boxes and we're going to take out the small packet of yeast and the recipe for bread. Making bread together as a family can be a fun project that you might want to try someday. But today, we're just going to talk about yeast and its role in the making of bread and how that can be very much like God's love for us and our love for the world. Yeast is a very small, tiny little ingredient. And you might think, if we leave it out, what's the big deal? It doesn't seem very important. We still have the flour and all of the other ingredients, and those are what's really important. What could be important about this very small, tiny little thing? And what is yeast anyways? Just doesn't seem very important. And you wouldn't be wrong if you mixed all the ingredients together and you baked it in the oven and you followed the directions except for adding the yeast. You'd get something that you could eat. It wouldn't taste that bad, but it probably wouldn't taste that good, and it would be very flat, kind of doughy and hard. And after a few bites, you might not want any. And that's when you see how important yeast is and the role that it plays. When it's mixed into the dough, it works from the inside out, filling it with air, making it light and fluffy, and filling it with a lightness that makes it taste good. And that's very much like how God's love works on us. It works from the inside out, changing our heart. And as our heart changes on the inside and turns us into someone that cares about other people and wants to make the world a better place, then we go out and through our actions, we change the world around us. Think about this a little bit. When someone does something nice for you and it puts a smile on your face and it makes you feel warm and loved, then you want to go out and make other people feel the same way. Because you feel good, you treat others with kindness, and then that grows, and pretty soon everyone around us is treating each other with kindness, and people are happy. So the nature of yeast is to grow and to change whatever it contacts. Very much like what happens when we accept the grace of God into our hearts, and it grows and it changes us from the inside out, and it transforms everything around us into a place where people are happy and they are sharing God's love with each other. Yeast is also very much like our own generosity. We don't have to do big things to make big changes. Just like yeast being very small, small things that we do to help one another can make big changes in the world. Just like the little boy in the story of the loaves and the fishes who shared his small lunch with Jesus and said, well, I don't have much, but you're welcome to it. And share it. God took that very small gift and he turned it into something that was enough to feed more than 5,000 people. So much so that they even have leftovers that they could take home with them and share and eat again. And that's why we want to talk about yeast today, so that we could see ourselves and the love that we have as something small, just like yeast, but if that you mix it with the right ingredients and you work on it a little bit, just like you would knead the bread, it can grow and turn into something wonderful. And with God's help, it can be something that can change the world. In your box, you'll also find a little package of goldfish crackers. And this is just to remind you that small things can make a big difference. And a small boy who shared his lunch of just a few fish and a couple of loaves of bread were enough to feed 5,000 people. In this last section, we're going to complete a craft called It's Love, Not Luck. And we're going to do something very special with this craft once you've finished it. We're going to include this craft in a meal that we deliver to an elder who lives in our community during the month of March. In East Longmeadow, we have two very special food programs that we use to help feed those who are struggling to put food on their table. This past year has been a really tough year for a lot of people because of the pandemic. Some people have not been able to work because their work has been closed. Some people have not been able to work because they've been sick or they've been taking care of someone who's sick. And some people have not been able to work because they've had to take care of their kids when their kids haven't been able to go to school. It's made it very tough to pay all the bill for some people to pay all of their bills and to also put food on the table. What's wonderful about the town of East Longmeadow is that we made a choice to help our neighbors. And so we collect food from people who have extra, and we make sure the people who need food are given the food. In fact, this past weekend on February 14th, our church ran a food drive and collected a tremendous amount of food that we are going to be working very hard in the next few weeks to get out to those people who need food. The other special program that we run here in town is something called Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels is a nutrition program that we use to feed elderly people living here in town who may not be able to get out to go grocery shopping, may not have enough money to buy healthy and nutritious food, and may also not be able to cook food for themselves anymore. So at the senior center, we cook meals for them, and then we have volunteers who deliver those meals to that person's door. During the month of March, we want to put one of your crafts in with the meal so that we can feed someone's soul and their hearts while we're feeding their bellies. You don't know how much it will mean to them to know that someone was thinking about them. Many of them have not had visitors for a very long time, and their family may not have been able to visit them. It will lift their hearts to get something special from you. So we'd like you to take your time and put a lot of love into this craft. And if you'd like to, you may even write a special note or a card to include along with it. And we will make sure that it gets out to people who could really use a smile. And this is a way that you, just like yeast, will cause something to grow. When the person gets your gift, you'll put a smile on their face. And just like the boy in the story that helped Jesus, you will be helping Jesus' kingdom to grow. This is the East Longmeadow Food Pantry. Our town runs its own pantry where people can donate food that they don't need, and it can be shared with families who do need food and aren't able to buy it for themselves. So I just had to share one more video with you all. This lesson we were talking about feeding the 5,000, and the word went out through our church that there were families in town who were struggling because of the pandemic. Maybe their parents couldn't work, maybe they were sick, and people needed food. And this is what happened. There's so much food here, so much paper towels and soap and all kinds of things that families need to keep their home. It's just amazing, and it's making me cry a little bit. So if you know of anyone who needs food, families who are struggling, people who are struggling, please have them call the senior center. We really want to share all of this love with them. And if you donated or someone you know donated, thank you from the bottom of our hearts.